Okay, Nor, so this is just for you, making a video just for you. Aren't I a nice guy? So let's look at this. We'll spend like 5 minutes just looking at 8.1, and then we'll spend the last 10 minutes looking at 8.2. So 8.1, the focus is really on two big things, ATP and then these different trophs. So let's just cover ATP one more time. So ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine is going to look, well, this whole molecule, in fact, looks a lot like adenine. So adenine, adenosine. I know they get confusing. If you call it adenine triphosphate, I will not fail you. Don't worry about it. Okay. So we've got as adenine, the sugar ribose, and this 3-phosphate group. And the whole purpose of ATP is as an energy carrier. And the energy is in this bond right here. And the reason why we're talking about ATP is because ATP is going to be used in photosynthesis to create sugar. So the question that a lot of people ask me, not everyone, a lot of ask me is, well, if plants just need ATP as an energy source, why make sugar? Why not just make a bunch of ATP? It's a great question. Okay, the problem with ATP is that this bond right here, this last bond where all the energy, is not very stable. It tends to kind of break apart on its own within a matter of hours. So just having a plant full of ATP, it's not going to work very well. It's almost like your cell phone, but worse. It's like a cell phone from a phone from 10 years ago. They don't hold their charge very long. So in order to hold their charge, what the plants are doing is they're using ATP to make sugar. And sugar, as you know, in your cupboard, it lasts forever. It doesn't rot. It stays along for a long time. So that's the purpose of photosynthesis, is to make ATP. And then we're going to use this ATP to make sugar. Okay, so let's look at these last two words, troph, heterotroph and autotroph. Troph is not like a trophy. Troph basically means to eat. So heterotroph means other eater. Okay, so they're getting their food by consuming or eating other living things, organisms. And autotrophs, this is where your sheet is a little bit wrong. Autotrophs use energy to make their food, not the energy of sunlight, any kind of energy they can find. It is true 99% of the time it is sunlight, but there are chemoautotrophs that use chemicals to make their own food, not the sunlight. And then photosynthesis we've already talked about. That's the process by which plants, autotrophs, use the sunlight to make sugar. And they do that in a two-step process. The first process is to make ATP. We know that the ATP molecule is unstable, so that they're going to use the ATP, and then we're going to use that energy to make sugar, which is very stable. Okay, so this section talks about how ADP and ATP are like a battery, a rechargeable battery. And yeah, plants and animals are constantly recycling between ATP and ADP. It makes energy when you go from ATP to ADP, and then it takes energy to make ADP back into ATP. And then we would obviously use food, right? So when we burn food, we're making ATP. And then how do we make more ADP? ATP? Well, we got to burn more food, right? Okay. Let's look then at this second section, which we didn't spend much time on. I'm going to save that. And I don't know where it went, but here, okay. All right, let's look at this last section. Okay. So this is our overview on photosynthesis. And photosynthesis, again, is those two steps you're seeing down here, the light-dependent reaction and the light-independent reaction. So this goes into a little bit more detail than we did in our PowerPoint. So let's look at some of these words right here, and I'll zoom in for you. Okay, so light is absorbed into molecules called pigments, and the most common pigment that we find in plants is chlorophyll. In fact, there's two different types of chlorophyll. There's the chlorophyll A and there's the chlorophyll B. And they absorb light in the blue range and the red range. You'll notice they reflect green light. They don't use green light very much, which is why plants are green. This chlorophyll is organized. It's not just like just this soup of chlorophyll floating around inside the plant. It's organized in organelles called a chloroplast. And within the chloroplast, it's in these stacks of little discs called thylakoids. And that's this diagram right here. Okay. The last thing, so we know what ATP is, we know about chlorophyll, chloroplasts. The last thing we need to know about is electrons. So electrons are part of an atom, and in almost every chemical reaction, not all, but in most chemical reactions, we are shuffling electrons from one atom to another. Now, when we're missing electrons, because electrons are negative, you'll see we have this NADP+. So this is missing electrons. And then this NADPH has electrons. It's gained electrons. And we're going to use this molecule, NADP+, or NADPH. We're going to use that to carry electrons in the process of photosynthesis. All right, so again, in the light-dependent reaction, which requires light, we're going to produce ATP, which is the energy source. We're going to produce oxygen, which is the waste product. And this is the part we didn't talk about earlier. We're going to form NADPH, which is going to carry electrons to the light-independent reaction. And those electrons, along with ATP and carbon dioxide, are going to be used to make sugar, to make glucose. So here, let's take a look at some of these questions here. This first one is, and I'll do some of this for you, or with you, is we have the wavelength. So the wavelength of light determines its color. And plants are going to use short wavelengths, or red, to make ATP. And they're also going to use blue, which is a little bit shorter, even shorter wavelength. Chemicals that absorb light are called photopigments. And chlorophyll makes plants look green because it reflects green light. Chlorophyll contains an abundance of sac-like photosynthetic membranes called thylakoids. These are the thylakoids here. And then the stroma is the fluid-filled portion of the chloroplast located outside the thylakoids. And that's where the second part of photosynthesis is going to happen. That's where we're actually going to make sugar. And the visible light absorbed by chlorophyll is basically going to boost the energy level of chlorophyll's electrons. And we're going to use that boost in energy levels to make ATP. Okay, this little section here talks about NADPH as being a carrier of electrons. And they're using a potato, a hot baked potato, as a metaphor. So the hot baked potato here, it's carrying heat, just like NADPH carries electrons, and then when the potato is put on the plate, the heat is then transferred to the plate, and now the oven mitt is lacking heat. And how does it get back its heat? Well, it has to go grab another potato. It has to go grab more high energy electrons from photosynthesis. So this is just showing that NADPH is a carrier of electrons, just like a hot potato is a carrier of heat. Where do the higher energy electrons carried by NADPH come from? They come from the light dependent reaction, the absorption of light energy, that is red or blue. Not glue, sorry, blue. Okay, this part we've covered. What are the reactants of photosynthesis reaction? So reactants are, what are the ingredients? Carbon dioxide and water. So these are the ingredients. What are the products? What are we making of the light dependent? Okay, not the whole photosynthesis thing. Okay, that would be oxygen and sugar, which is not even an option here. But in the light dependent, we're making oxygen ATP. We're also making NADPH, which is going to carry the electrons. Where does the light independent reaction occur? Where do the light independent reactions occur? So this light independent would mean we don't need light. That's where we're going to take the carbon dioxide, we're going to take the ATP and the electrons, we're going to make that into sugar. That happens out in the stroma, just kind of in the watery part of the chloroplasts. Okay, so let's complete the illustration by writing the reactants and products. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, so in the light dependent, we need light. We need water. So we need water. And that's really it, right? And we're going to take that water and we're going to turn that into oxygen. Okay. So we're going to take water and turn that into oxygen plus ATP. Okay. Then we're going to take that ATP plus carbon dioxide plus some electrons from our NADPH, and we're going to plus a 5 carbon sugar. And what are we going to make? We're going to make a 6 carbon sugar, glucose. And that's basically it. So let's look at our original formula. Was carbon dioxide plus water gives us glucose and oxygen. And then we've got our ATP, we've got our 5 carbon sugar. And I think that is it. So I'm going to end the video here, and hopefully that'll help you answer the questions for 8.2.